Leuser is still the biggest single contiguous forest plot in the whole of Southeast Asia. And it's the only place really where you've got decent expanses of lowland forest land. And also within Leuser there's 3 peat swamp forests. Now 2 of those peat swamp forests are still reasonably intact, although Tripura is badly damaged. But what's happening now is that the threats, the palm oil concessions and the road being constructed are now actually sort of excising all these lowland areas. Now these lowland forests are the most important habitats for all of the wildlife. You don't get, if you fly over Leuser, you see a lot of really good, pristine primary rainforest, but it's also high, steep mountains. And you don't get orangutans, tigers, elephants, rhinos up that high. So they're all existing at the very edges, at the bottom of the hills. And it's exactly those areas that are being nibbled away and fragmented and crisscrossed by roads and plantations and stuff. So it's pretty critical right now. I mean, even though you can still say that Leuser is big and it's got a lot of primary forest in it, the actual key wildlife habitats are those areas right on the edge at the bottom of the hills, and they are being eaten away as fast as ever. Most of the key, I mean, there is, within the Leuser ecosystem, there is this Leuser National Park, which is less than half the size. Now, all the major, really important habitat areas for your elephants and orangutans, tigers, and everything else are outside that national park. The national park only contains about 35% of the remaining Sumatran orangutans, whereas Leuser contains 85%. So if you just protect that national park, you're going to lose these species. You know, there's not enough habitat in there for viable populations of these species. So we need the Leuser ecosystem to be protected, not just the national park. Now, right now, the Aceh government's special plan ignores the existence. It doesn't even mention the existence of the Leuser ecosystem, even though it's a national strategic area whose function has to be acknowledged in national spatial planning law. Now, we thought, well, if the Aceh government doesn't put the Leuser ecosystem into its spatial plan, it means it wants to chop it down. And then a few weeks after that spatial plan came out, the governor actually issued a law, the new governor's permit, explaining how to get permits for concessions within the Leuser ecosystem. So it's very, now that's the tragedy. If we don't get the entire Leuser ecosystem protected, we will lose those species, guaranteed. The Leuser ecosystem is a national strategic area for its environmental function. Now, as far as I understand the law, that means that you're not allowed to do any activities within the Leuser ecosystem that damage that environmental function. Now, palm oil plantations do damage that environmental function, and so do roads. And what they also do is they cause massive, massive costs. A lot of these areas are now the headwaters of major watersheds. Like, the whole entire agricultural zones depend on the water coming out of these watersheds for their economic existence. Yeah? Now, if you denude them for the profits of 1 or 2 companies, it's foolhardy. It makes no economic sense. Now, what I've really seen in Aceh especially is, if you look at who actually owns, which companies own these plantations, they're all based here in Medan, not in Aceh. So the lion's share of all the profits from the plantation industry in Aceh comes to Medan, and nothing stays there. Actually, what does stay there is costs. Yeah. The costs of landslides, flash floods, erosion, loss of agricultural production, loss of lives, and those costs are staggering. Yeah? Staggering. The World Bank did a study of flash floods in Aceh in just 19 days at the end of 2006, and estimated that the costs of those floods in just 19 days was $210 million. Now, I would wager, if you actually balance that against the profits that Aceh receives from the palm oil industry, it doesn't make sense. So I think if you actually looked at the numbers, you would realize that the palm oil industry in Aceh does not make any economic sense. Well, there's this common sort of misperception that conservation is against local economic development. Absolutely not. Conservation and long-term sustainable economic development are exactly the same thing. Conservation is not the same thing as destroying all of your resources for short-term profit, especially for somebody who doesn't even live in the area. Yeah? That's not the same thing. But if you want a long-term sustainable economy in Aceh, you've got to protect those forests and those watersheds. You have to. Look at areas like Pidi, Pidi, the rice bowl of Aceh. Now, right now, the watershed that supplies the rice bowl of Aceh is almost gone. It's almost completely bald. And now, as soon as you destroy that for the profits of somebody living in Medan, you destroy the whole rice production of that entire region. It's economically stupid. And here's a classic example too. So what I'm trying to say is that the local economy is very much dependent on conservation of these resources. Look at Tripa, for example. Tripa is an area of peat swamp forest, extremely high carbon stocks, very high densities of orangutans. Now, when you go into an area like that as a plantation, you basically evict some of the local people whose family may have had or claimed that land for 3 generations or something, but they don't have any paperwork. So you keep them off the land. Then you put in drainage canal. Then you chop down the forest, bulldoze it, and then you burn it. And you kill every living thing, even ants, and termites, and mosses, and lichens. Incinerate all that. Then you dig drainage canals and you lower the water table by about a meter, which all of a sudden exposes all the carbon in the peat to oxygen in the atmosphere, oxidizes and releases CO2, and is a major contributor to the global climate change. Now, what also happens is that once that process starts, the land surface itself goes down by 2.5 meters in 25 years, so 1 crop of palm oil. Now, remember that we're also facing rising sea levels, and these places are on the coast. So here's the situation. You've got some companies going into a place, they kick all the local people, they kill everything that lives there, they actually ruin the fishery supply, which is the #1 source of protein for local communities. They destroy that. They destroy their freshwater wells, they make them all saline. Then they get 1 crop of palm oil, and then the land just goes down, and the entire thing ends up in the sea. Now, how can you argue that that is in any way in the interests of economic development? That's purely stupidity, destroying everything you have, creating all sorts of problems, destroying the potential for local communities to have a long-term livelihood and economy for greed. And at the end of the day, you throw the whole thing into the sea. I think Indonesia should be very proud that it still has something like the Leuser Ecosystem. Most other countries in Southeast Asia, they just don't have anything that compares, anything that comes close. You've got one big forest block there. You've got rhinos, elephants, tigers, and myriad other species living there. The potential for tourism and economy is fantastic. It's supplying all this water supplies everywhere for agriculture and everything else. You've got a beautiful province there in Aceh with some of the best beaches in the world. Investment in Aceh always seems to look inland, whereas it never seems to look at the coast, which is possibly the biggest asset that Aceh has. Indonesia should be very proud that it still has something like the Leuser Ecosystem. It's this huge area, it's a beautiful, pristine forest. Many other countries, or most in Southeast Asia, haven't got anything that even compares. You've got these species living there that, globally important. And, but there's a big risk now that we lose the whole thing. The fact that the Leuser Ecosystem exists is because the local Achenese leaders over the last several decades recognized its value, and they wanted it protected. And now you have a government in Aceh that's just kind of like, for want of a better phrase, sticking the finger up and saying, we're going to just trash it all now for a quick profit. Now, what makes me a little bit optimistic is the national government seems to recognize the importance of Leuser and seems to want to protect it. Most of the Achenese people want it protected. They're sick and tired of all these disasters that destroy the village and wipe out their rice crops and everything else. They're fed up of that. For what? Money that just leaks out of the area and goes somewhere else. And so you have a unique opportunity to really protect that area. But what you have right now is a government in Aceh that just doesn't seem to care and doesn't seem to understand. One of the two being they don't understand or they don't care. And they're quite willing to just open it up and sell it to the highest bidder and trash the whole thing. Now that would be the tragedy, because that is going to happen under this spatial plan right now, within the next few years. I keep telling people that, if you start to encroach these lowlands in Leuser, then the rhinos will be gone in 5 years, guaranteed. The elephants will be gone in 10. There will be no viable elephant populations left in Sumatran in 10 years. They're already dying every month, every week in fact they're being poisoned and everything else. Now, I hear rumours that there are populations in Aceh now that don't have any males. So these populations are all going to go extinct. So within 10 years, I reckon there won't be any viable elephant populations. And tigers and orangutans will be borderline down to just a few hundred individuals of orangutans and maybe a few dozen tigers in about 10 to 15 years, if we don't do something now. Well, this is it. I mean, the crux is that the future of all these species and the future of the Leuser ecosystem and the potential for Aceh's long-term economic prosperity depends on decisions being made like this year, right now. Now, people will look back, if we don't make the right decisions, people will look back at 2016, 2017 as the time when everything went wrong. And there, you know, all these species were lost, all this habitat was lost, decisions were made that made this happen, and the economy of Aceh, you know, potential economy of Aceh was sabotaged. Yeah? It's right now, this is the key time.
Right now, yeah.
Decisions being made on a daily basis right now determine the fate of Leuser ecosystem and all those iconic species. Yeah, there is still time. But I'm not very optimistic if we don't get it done now. It has to be done now. Leuser has to be given full protection right now.